I grew up in a very small town near the mountains. Life there was quiet and slow. Every morning, the bakery on Main Street opened at 6. Mr. Lewis cleaned the front window with the same old towel. The bus arrived at the station at exactly 7:30. Nothing ever changed. Sometimes I liked that feeling. It felt safe. But sometimes it made me feel trapped. After school, I helped my father at his repair shop. The room always smelled like oil and metal. My father fixed old radios, fans, and broken tools. He worked hard every day, even when his hands hurt. "Pass me the screwdriver," he said one afternoon. I handed it to him and watched him work carefully. "You need steady hands for this job," he said. I smiled a little. Maybe my hands are not made for repair work. My father looked at me for a second but said nothing. That night, rain hit the windows while we ate dinner. My mother served hot soup and fresh bread. The television played softly in the corner. I looked down at my bowl for a long time before speaking. "I want to leave town one day," I said quietly. The sound of rain suddenly felt louder. My mother stopped eating. My father slowly put down his spoon. "The city is not easy," he said. "I know," I answered. "You think life becomes better there?" he asked. I did not know how to explain my feelings. I only knew something inside me wanted more. More people, more chances, more life. "I just want to try," I said softly. My father leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "A simple life is not a bad life," he said. "I know," I replied, "but I don't want to spend my whole life wondering what could happen." No one spoke after that. Later that night, I walked alone to the old bus stop near the edge of town. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet and shiny under the streetlights. An old poster moved in the wind beside the station bench. It said, "Dream big, start anywhere." I stared at those words for a long time. Far away, I heard the sound of a late bus driving through the dark road. For the first time in my life, I felt afraid of the future. But deep inside, I also felt ready for it. 3 months later, I stood at the train station with 2 heavy bags beside my feet. The morning air felt cold. The sky was still dark. My mother kept fixing my jacket again and again, even though it already looked fine. "Did you pack your medicine?" she asked. "Yes." "Your charger?" "Yes, Mom." She gave a small nod, but her eyes still looked worried. My father stood a few steps away from us with his hands in his pockets. He had been quiet all morning. The train arrived with a loud sound. People quickly moved around us. Some looked tired. Some looked excited. My heart started beating faster. This was real now. Before I stepped onto the train, my father suddenly called my name. I turned around. He walked toward me and placed an old watch into my hand. The leather strap looked worn and soft from age. "This belonged to your grandfather," he said. I looked surprised. "Dad." He avoided my eyes for a moment. "Come back if life becomes too hard," he said quietly. I wanted to say something strong and confident, but the words stayed stuck inside my throat. So I only nodded. When the train started moving, I looked out the window and watched my parents become smaller and smaller. My mother waved until I could not see her anymore. For a moment, I almost got off at the next stop, but I stayed in my seat. Hours later, the city finally appeared outside the window. Tall buildings covered the sky. Bright signs flashed everywhere. Cars moved endlessly through crowded streets. The noise felt heavy in my ears. Everything looked fast, too fast. After leaving the station, I tried to follow a map on my phone, but I got lost almost immediately. People walked around me without stopping. Nobody smiled. Nobody noticed me. I carried my bags through 3 different streets, before finding my tiny rented room. The room was small and old. The wallpaper was peeling near the window. I could hear someone arguing loudly through the thin walls. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. That evening I called my mother. "I don't think I belong here," I admitted. There was silence for a second. Then she spoke softly. "Being afraid does not mean you made the wrong choice." I closed my eyes and listened carefully. "Courage is not about feeling strong all the time," she continued. "Sometimes courage is simply staying." After the call ended, I sat quietly beside the window. Outside, the city lights filled the dark sky like thousands of stars. Everything still felt unfamiliar. But the next morning, I woke up early, took a deep breath, and stepped outside again. City life became harder after the first week. Money disappeared quickly. Rent was expensive. Even simple meals cost more than I expected. Every night I counted my remaining bills again and again at my small desk. Soon I found 2 jobs. In the morning I worked at a busy coffee shop near the train station. At night I cleaned tables at a small restaurant across town. By the end of each day my feet hurt badly. The coffee shop was always crowded. Customers rushed in before work and spoke too quickly for me to understand sometimes. "1 latte. Extra ice. Hurry, please." Everything moved fast. One morning, I accidentally gave the wrong drink to a customer. "This isn't mine," the man said sharply. "I'm sorry," I answered quickly. Behind me, my manager sighed loudly. "You need to focus," she said. "People here don't wait forever." Her words stayed in my head all day. A few nights later, something even worse happened. The restaurant was full because of the rain outside. People laughed loudly while warm music played in the background. I carried a tray of drinks carefully between crowded tables. Then someone suddenly stepped backward. My shoulder hit his arm. The tray slipped from my hands. Glasses crashed onto the floor. Cold drinks splashed across the table and onto a customer's coat. The entire restaurant became quiet. My face burned with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," I said again and again, while cleaning the mess. After work, I sat alone behind the restaurant near the trash bins. Rainwater slowly dripped from the roof beside me. I felt tired, ashamed, small. Maybe my father was right, I thought. Maybe I was not strong enough for this life. Then the back door opened. An older co-worker named Elena walked outside holding 2 warm paper cups. She sat beside me without saying anything at first. After a moment, she handed me 1 drink. "You know," she said calmly, "I cried almost every night during my first year here." I looked at her in surprise. "You?" I asked. She laughed softly. "Of course, this city is hard." I stared down at the warm cup in my hands. "Then why did you stay?" I asked quietly. Elena looked out at the rainy street. "Because leaving was not the life I wanted," she said. Her answer stayed in my heart. Little by little, things slowly changed after that night. I learned how to speak with more confidence. I learned how to stay calm under pressure. I learned how to smile, even on difficult days. And slowly the city stopped feeling like an enemy. It still challenged me every day, but now I was beginning to challenge it back. One afternoon, the coffee shop became unusually quiet. Rain rolled slowly down the windows, and soft music played through the speakers above the counter. I wiped empty tables while thinking about unpaid bills and another long shift at the restaurant later that night. Near one table, I noticed a colorful flyer someone had left behind. I almost threw it away with the empty cups. But then one sentence caught my attention. "City Photography Contest. Show us your story." I froze for a moment. Photography had always been my secret dream. Back in my hometown, I loved taking pictures of simple things. Morning fog over the mountains, old couples walking together, children riding bikes after school. I never showed my photos to many people. They felt personal, like small pieces of my life. I quietly folded the flyer and slipped it into my pocket. That night, after work, I sat in my tiny room and looked through old photos on my laptop. My hometown looked warm in every picture, safe, honest, alive. A small voice inside me whispered, "You are not good enough for this contest." I almost closed the computer. The next day, Elena noticed me staring at the flyer during my break. "What's that?" she asked. "Nothing important," I replied quickly. She pulled the paper from my hands before I could stop her. "A photography contest?" she asked with a smile. "You take photos?" "Just for fun," I said nervously. "Show me." I hesitated, but finally handed her my phone. She slowly looked through the pictures in silence. A boy sleeping on a bus, rain on a cafe window, my father working quietly in the repair shop. Elena's expression softened. "These are beautiful," she said. I laughed awkwardly. "They're just normal moments." "No," she replied gently. "They feel real. That's different." For the next few weeks, I carried my camera everywhere. Before work, I walked through quiet streets at sunrise. After work, I photographed tired workers riding late-night trains. I captured lonely streetlights, rainy sidewalks, and strangers sitting silently beside each other. The city suddenly looked different through my camera lens. It no longer felt cold. It felt human. Still, I almost did not submit my photos. On the final night, I stared at the application form for nearly an hour. My hands shook above the keyboard. "What if people hate them?" I whispered. Then I remembered something Elena once told me. People fail when they stop believing in themselves too early. I took a deep breath. And finally, I pressed send. After that, all I could do was wait. Days passed after I submitted my photos. Then weeks passed. Life continued as usual. Every morning, I served coffee to tired office workers. Every night, I cleaned tables under bright restaurant lights. Part of me slowly stopped thinking about the contest. Maybe that was easier. Maybe expecting nothing hurt less. One busy afternoon, I was carrying fresh cups behind the counter when my phone suddenly vibrated inside my pocket. I almost ignored it. But then I noticed the email title, Photography Contest Results. My hands instantly became cold. For a few seconds, I could not move. "Open it," Elena said from beside the coffee machine. I swallowed nervously and tapped the screen. Then I froze. "Second place winner." I read the words again and again to make sure they were real. "You won?" Elena asked excitedly. I looked up slowly. I think I did." She laughed loudly and pulled me into a quick hug while customers nearby started clapping after hearing the news. My chest felt tight. Not because I was sad, because for the first time in a long time, I finally felt seen. That night, I walked home slowly through the city streets. Rain covered the sidewalks with silver reflections from the streetlights. Cars passed beside me, but everything felt strangely quiet inside my heart. I stopped near a bridge and looked at the glowing buildings around me. Months ago, this city felt cold and impossible. Now it felt alive. And somehow I felt alive too. A few days later, one of my winning photos appeared online for a travel magazine. Then another company contacted me for a small project. The opportunities were still small, but they were real. About a year later, I returned to my hometown for the first time since leaving. The mountains still stood quietly behind the town. The bakery still opened early every morning. Even the old bus stop looked exactly the same. But I felt different when I walked those streets, stronger somehow. My father stood outside the repair shop when I arrived. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled slightly. "You look tired," he said. I laughed softly. "City life." He nodded slowly, as if he finally understood something. That evening we sat together outside the shop, while the sun disappeared behind the mountains. After a long silence, my father finally spoke. "I was never afraid of the city," he admitted quietly. I looked at him. "I was afraid you would forget home." My eyes filled with tears immediately. "I could never forget," I whispered. He gave a small nod and looked out at the darkening street. At that moment, I understood something important. Dreams are not only about success. Sometimes dreams teach us courage. Sometimes they teach us pain. And sometimes they help us understand the people we love. When I left town again 2 days later, I looked out the bus window at the quiet streets, the mountains, and the old repair shop. The town had not changed, but I had.